The night everything changed started out like any other me, sitting on the couch, half watching some mindless TV while Karen tapped away on her phone next to me.
It was routine. Comfortable, even. Until it wasn't. It began with a text. A simple notification on her screen, nothing new.
But this time, she didn't just glance at it and put her phone down. No, she grinned, like, really grinned, and then quickly turned the screen away, locking it before I could catch an aim.
My chest tightened with a suspicion I hadn't felt before. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my tone light, casual. I wasn't expecting the bombshell that was about to detonate my life. "Oh, just Megan from the office," she said, almost too quickly, not even looking up from her phone. For some reason, that explanation didn't sit right.
Call it instinct, call it paranoia, hell, maybe I was just being a jealous husband for once. But something in me snapped, and I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to let this go.
I didn't say anything, not yet. Instead, I just watched her.
For the first time in years, I really watched her, how she smiled at her screen more than she did at me, how she seemed more engaged in the conversation on her phone than with the man sitting next to her, her husband of 15 years.
It wasn't the first text. It wasn't even the grin.
It was the way she locked that phone like it held the deepest secret she couldn't risk me seeing.
That was the moment I knew something was wrong. And it was only going to get worse from here. You know that feeling you get in the pit of your stomach, like something's rotting inside you? That was me for the next few days.
I wasn't sleeping much, just laying there next to Karen, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. But every little thing she did from that night on felt like a punch in the gut. She had this habit of leaving her phone face up on the coffee table whenever we watched TV. Now it was always face down, or worse, clutched in her hand like it was some life support machine. She'd spend more time in the bathroom too, and not in the usual "I need a break from the kids" kind of way. I'd hear muffled voices from behind the door, the soft ping of notifications as soon as she got in there. So, I did what any desperate husband would do in my situation. I started snooping.
It wasn't like I hadn't tried talking to her. I had. One night after dinner, I asked her outright if anything was wrong. Her answer? "I'm just tired, you know? Work's been stressful." Tired. That word stung in ways I can't even explain. I couldn't call her a liar outright, but I knew damn well it wasn't the truth. She wasn't tired, she was bored. Bored with me, with us, with the life we'd built. But I didn't have proof. Not yet. That all changed on a Tuesday night. Karen had left her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she took one of her long showers. It was a small, rare window of opportunity, and I wasn't about to waste it. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed it, unlocked it, thank God she hadn't thought to change the passcode, and scrolled straight to her messages. My hands were shaking, heart hammering so hard I thought I might have a heart attack right there in our kitchen. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe some flirty banter, maybe just harmless messages that I could chalk up to my own insecurity. But when I saw the texts, it felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about your hands. You know I'm not ready for anything serious, but you make it so hard to resist." The name at the top of the message thread, Josh. Some guy I'd never even heard her mention. And the worst part? The timestamps on these messages weren't from weeks ago, or even days. They were from that very afternoon, when she told me she was running errands. Errands, my ass. I stood there for what felt like hours, reading and rereading those texts, feeling my stomach twist into knots so tight I thought I might throw up. I tried to swallow down the rage, the disbelief, the hurt, but it was too much. I was standing in the middle of my kitchen, my entire marriage unraveling in the palm of my hand. Josh was no work colleague. He wasn't some harmless friend. This was the guy she was sneaking off with when she was supposedly too tired for us. It wasn't even about sex, not entirely. I knew Karen. When she got bored, she didn't need excitement, she needed someone to remind her she was still alive. And apparently, this Josh guy was doing just that. I didn't have the courage to confront her right then.
I put the phone back on the counter and tried to breathe, but the anger was bubbling under the surface, ready to explode at any moment.
I needed a plan. I needed to be sure. The next few days were hell. I couldn't look at Karen the same way.
Every time she smiled, I wondered if she was thinking about him. Every time she touched me, all I could feel was his ghost between us.
I knew I needed more. I needed something that would rip away any last thread of doubt I might have been clinging to.
So, I did the thing I swore I'd never do. I installed spyware on her phone.
I hated myself for it.
I felt dirty, like I was sinking to some new low. But the truth is, I didn't care. At that point, my only focus was finding out just how deep this betrayal went. And it didn't take long for me to get my answer. I started monitoring her texts, her calls, her location. Every time she told me she was heading to work or running errands, I'd pull up the app and see exactly where she was going. Sure enough, it wasn't the grocery store or the office. She was heading to the same part of town every few days, some residential area I didn't recognize. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and I knew I had to follow her.
The opportunity came a week later.
It was Friday, and she told me she was heading out to meet some friends for dinner. I smiled, played the supportive husband role, and waited for her to leave. 10 minutes later, I was out the door, following her car at a distance. She drove across town, not to any restaurant I knew of, but to a small house in a quiet neighborhood. I parked a few blocks away and watched as she got out of the car, looking around like she was making sure no one was watching. Then, she walked up to the door, knocked once, and was let inside. I sat there for hours, waiting, hoping I was wrong. Maybe she really was just visiting a friend. Maybe this was all in my head, and I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew the truth. And when she finally came back out, it wasn't with any friends. It was with Josh. I watched as they kissed. Not a friendly kiss, not a casual peck on the cheek. It was the kind of kiss that left no room for doubt. The kind of kiss she hadn't given me in months.
And in that moment, something in me snapped.
I wanted to go over there, drag him out by his neck, scream at her right there on the street.
But I didn't.
I just sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, watching as she got back into her car and drove away like nothing had happened.
I followed her home.
When she walked through the door, she was all smiles.
"Dinner was great," she said, giving me that practiced, innocent look.
I nodded, biting down on my rage, but inside I was already planning my next move.
I couldn't just let this slide.
I wasn't going to be the guy who got cheated on and did nothing. No, I was going to make her pay.
And I wasn't just going after her.
Josh was going to regret the day he ever met my wife. I had never been a man who believed in making a scene. You handle things quietly, keep your emotions under control. But when I sat there that night, watching Karen stroll through the house like nothing was wrong, every bit of that self-control I'd prided myself on over the years dissolved.
I couldn't hold it in anymore.
The moment of confrontation was coming, and I was done pretending. She walked into the kitchen, humming to herself like she wasn't living two lives, and poured herself a glass of water. I stood in the doorway, staring at her, thinking about all the times we'd shared this space, family dinners, quiet mornings, her laughter filling the room.
Now, all of it felt like a lie. "How was dinner?"
I asked, my voice low and controlled, even though my insides were burning.
Karen glanced at me, not even blinking. "Good. You know, same old stuff."
We talked about work, had some drinks, nothing too exciting. She smiled, but it was too easy. Too fake. That smile had gotten me through rough days, but now it felt like a mask, something she used to cover up the truth. I stepped closer, keeping my gaze locked on her.
"Who's Josh?"
Her hand froze on the glass, mid-sip.
That one little question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to go off.
For a split second, I saw panic flash across her face, but she quickly masked it with a laugh.
"Josh?
Oh, he's just a friend from work."
"A friend."
That word cut deeper than I expected.
She was really going to stick to the script, wasn't she?
I nodded slowly, pretending to accept her answer.
A friend. Right.
She set the glass down and turned to face me, that smile still plastered on her face.
What's with the interrogation? You're acting weird.
I didn't say anything for a second, just stared at her, trying to control the rage boiling inside. The calm before the storm.
Then, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone.
I opened the app that I'd been using to track her, pulled up the screen, and tossed it on the counter in front of her.
Explain this.
Karen looked down at the screen, and all the color drained from her face. She knew what it was: GPS data, timestamps, all showing where she'd been when she was supposedly out running errands or meeting friends.
For once, she didn't have a quick response.
She just stood there, eyes wide, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water.
Still want to tell me he's just a friend?
I asked, my voice growing colder. She stared at the phone, then slowly looked back up at me.
How long have you known? I could have laughed at that.
Not an apology, not a denial, just a question.
Does it matter?
Yes, it matters, she said, her voice rising. You were spying on me.
You invaded my privacy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
She was actually trying to make me the villain. I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't about to let her twist this around. I wouldn't have had to invade your privacy if you weren't sneaking around with another man behind my back. My voice was louder now, filled with all the anger and betrayal I'd been bottling up for weeks.
Don't even try to turn this on me.
Karen took a step back, crossing her arms defensively. I wasn't sneaking around, she said, her voice sharp.
It wasn't like that. That made me snap.
I slammed my hand down on the counter, making her jump.
Then what the hell was it, Karen?
Huh? What do you call spending your afternoons with some guy, lying to me about where you are?
Do you think I'm stupid?
I wasn't lying, she said, her voice quieter now, but the defiance was still there.
I just didn't tell you everything because I knew how you'd react. How I'd react. I couldn't help but laugh at that. You're damn right I'm reacting. You think I'm just going to stand here and let you walk all over me? She looked away, like she couldn't meet my eyes anymore. For a moment, neither of us said anything.
The silence between us was deafening, filled with everything we hadn't been saying for months. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper.
I was lonely, okay? You're never here. You're always working, always busy. And I didn't know how to tell you I needed more.
I stared at her, dumbfounded.
So, this is my fault? I've been working my ass off for this family, and you're telling me you cheated because you were lonely? Do you even hear yourself?
It's not like that, she said quickly.
I didn't mean for it to happen. I
needed someone to talk to, someone who actually noticed I was still here.
That hit harder than I expected. I wasn't perfect, I knew that. But this?
This was a whole different level of betrayal. You should have talked to me, I said through gritted teeth.
You didn't even give me a chance.
Her eyes were shining now, on the verge of tears.
I tried
talking to you, but you were never really there.
I don't even know who we are anymore.
I shook my head, trying to process what she was saying.
You're really going to stand here and tell me this whole thing happened because I was busy working? That's your excuse for screwing around with another guy?
She wiped at her eyes, but the tears were falling now. I never slept with him, she said, her voice cracking.
It wasn't like that. I know what you think, but it wasn't physical. I didn't mean to hurt you. Didn't mean to hurt me?
I repeated, my voice rising again.
You've been lying to my face for weeks, maybe longer, and you didn't mean to hurt me?
She didn't answer, just stood there, tears streaming down her face, looking at me like she was the one who'd been wronged.
It made me sick.
I wanted to scream, to punch something, to break something.
But instead, I turned and walked away. I went straight to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me.
I couldn't look at her anymore, couldn't stand being in the same room. I paced around the room, trying to calm myself down, but the anger just kept building.
Minutes passed.
Then, a soft knock at the door.
"Can we talk?"
she asked from the other side, her voice shaky.
I didn't answer. I didn't want to talk. Not now, not ever.
But she opened the door anyway, stepping inside like she had the right to just waltz back into my life like nothing had happened. "I didn't sleep with him," she said again, standing in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself.
"I swear, it never went that far."
I stared at her, feeling like I didn't even recognize the woman in front of me. "I saw you kiss him, Karen."
"Don't stand there and lie to my face again."
She winced, like I'd slapped her, and took a shaky breath.
I know
what it looked like, but it wasn't what you think."
I raised an eyebrow.
"So kissing him wasn't cheating?
Meeting him behind my back, lying to me every day, that wasn't cheating?" She didn't have an answer for that.
She just stood there, staring at the floor, while the silence stretched between us. "I didn't want it to happen like this," she whispered.
"I didn't want any of this to happen."
"Well, it did," I said coldly.
"And now we have to deal with it."
For the first time, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with something like desperation.
"I don't want to lose you." That was the final straw. I let out a harsh laugh.
"You already lost me the second you decided to run off with another guy. You're just too selfish to admit it." She flinched, wiping at her eyes again, but I didn't care. I was done feeling sorry for her. I was done letting her control the narrative.
This wasn't some miscommunication, some harmless flirtation.
This was a betrayal, and there was no going back from it. "I need some space," I said finally, my voice flat.
"I'm leaving for a few days."
She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off.
"I don't care what you have to say right now, Karen. I don't want to hear it."
She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face.
"Where are you going?" I shrugged. "I don't know. But I need to get the hell out of here."
Without waiting for her response, I grabbed a bag, packed some clothes, and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there in the wreckage of our marriage. As I drove away, I didn't know where I was going or how this would end. But one thing was clear: I wasn't going to let this slide.
She wasn't getting off easy.
And neither was Josh.
I didn't go far that night. Just needed some air, some distance from her.
I parked at a rest stop, a half hour out of town, and sat there with the engine running, staring at the highway, wondering how the hell I ended up in this situation.
My mind kept looping back to the same point: she betrayed me.
And not just with anyone, some loser named Josh who probably thought he could swoop in and take what was mine.
I must have sat there for hours, thoughts circling like vultures.
Every memory, every smile, every kiss, now tainted.
Nothing felt real anymore. The life I thought we had, it was nothing. She'd gotten bored, of all things. How the hell does someone get bored with a family like ours? Bored enough to throw it all away?
I could feel my grip on the steering wheel tightening with every passing minute. But sitting there, feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to fix anything. She thought she could lie her way out of this, that she could play innocent and shift the blame on me, like it was my fault she was sneaking around.
She thought she could get away with it. Not this time.
She wasn't just going to walk all over me, break everything we built, and walk away without consequences. No, Karen had made her choice.
Now, I was going to make mine.
I headed back to the house around dawn, just as the sun was creeping over the horizon. I didn't want to sleep in some motel bed, not when I needed to start planning.
And believe me, I was planning.
When I walked in, the house was quiet. Karen was asleep in our room, her room now, I guess. I wasn't about to share a bed with her again.
I didn't even go upstairs.
Instead, I went straight to my office, sat down at my desk, and fired up the computer.
The first thing I did?
Change every password we shared, our bank accounts, the credit cards, everything. It didn't take long, just a few minutes of work, but it was a necessary step. If she wanted to play games, she wasn't going to do it with my money. After that, I grabbed my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and made the first call of the day.
I'd never needed a lawyer before. Never thought I'd be the guy sitting across from someone in a fancy suit talking about divorce. But now, it was the only thing on my mind. I wasn't going to let this drag out. I wanted to get ahead of it, control the narrative before Karen could start spinning her sob story to the world. By the time Karen woke up, I'd already spoken to 3 lawyers. The last one, a guy named Eric, seemed perfect for what I had in mind: sharp, efficient, and ruthless. Just the kind of guy I needed to help me tear her world apart. He'd already given me the outline for how we could proceed. I'd handle the finances, the kids, and the house. She'd get nothing except what I allowed her to have. The kitchen was quiet when she came downstairs, looking like she hadn't slept much. Good. I didn't acknowledge her at first, just sat at the table with my coffee, staring at the phone like it was more interesting than her. "Where did you go?" she asked, her voice cautious, as if she were trying to gauge how much trouble she was in. "Needed some air," I replied without looking up. There was an awkward pause. I could feel her watching me, waiting for something, maybe hoping I'd come around, let her explain herself, forgive her. But that wasn't happening. Not anymore. "Are we going to talk about this?" she asked, taking a seat across from me. "Talk?" I repeated, finally looking up at her. "I thought we already did all the talking." "Jake, I know you're angry, but..." "Angry?" I cut her off. "You think this is about me being angry? Karen, you didn't just break my trust. You destroyed our family. And you think this is about me being angry?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. She could cry all she wanted. She'd brought this on herself. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You already have," I said, standing up from the table. "The question now is how we handle the aftermath." "What do you mean?" She looked genuinely scared, like she hadn't considered that this would have real consequences. Maybe she thought I'd let it go, that we could just move past it. I wasn't going to let her off that easy. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, as coldly as I could manage. I wasn't about to sugarcoat it. I wanted her to know exactly where we stood. "I've already spoken to a lawyer." Her face went pale. "Jake, no. Please. We can work this out. I'm sorry. I know I messed up, but please don't do this." I ignored her. "You've got until the end of the week to figure out where you're going. This house is mine. You can't just kick me out," she said, her voice rising in desperation. "We built this house together." "Correction," I said, leaning forward. "I built this house. I paid for it. You contributed nothing except your lies." She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her there with her pathetic excuses. I had more important things to do, like making sure she couldn't touch any of the assets. I spent the rest of the day tying up loose ends. I called the bank, put a hold on the joint accounts, and set up new ones in my name alone. I changed the locks on the house, just in case she got any ideas about sneaking back in while I was gone. I wasn't playing around. I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she'd done. That night, I didn't say a word to her. I didn't eat dinner at the same table, didn't ask how her day went, didn't even look at her. She was a ghost in the house. And it was only the beginning. The next morning, I took things up a notch. I had been thinking about how to hit her where it hurt most, and I realized that her reputation meant everything to her. She prided herself on being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect friend. Well, I was about to shatter that image into a million pieces. I logged into our social media accounts and started posting. First, I updated my status to separated. Then, I made a post explaining why. I kept it simple, no theatrics. Just the facts. After 15 years of marriage, I've discovered that my wife, Karen, has been carrying on an affair. 4 months, she lied and cheated while I was working to support our family. I will be filing for divorce. Within minutes, the comments started pouring in. Some were sympathetic, offering support. Others were shocked, not believing Karen could do something like this. But I didn't care about the comments. I cared about the message. I wanted everyone to know what she'd done. Karen saw the post about an hour later. I heard her phone. The night everything changed started out like any other me, sitting on the couch, half watching some mindless TV while Karen tapped away on her phone next to me. It was routine. Comfortable, even. Until it wasn't. It began with a text. A simple notification on her screen, nothing new. But this time, she didn't just glance at it and put her phone down. No, she grinned, like, really grinned, and then quickly turned the screen away, locking it before I could catch an aim. My chest tightened with a suspicion I hadn't felt before. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my tone light, casual. I wasn't expecting the bombshell that was about to detonate my life. "Oh, just Megan from the office," she said, almost too quickly, not even looking up from her phone. For some reason, that explanation didn't sit right. Call it instinct, call it paranoia, hell, maybe I was just being a jealous husband for once. But something in me snapped, and I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to let this go. I didn't say anything, not yet. Instead, I just watched her. For the first time in years, I really watched her, how she smiled at her screen more than she did at me, how she seemed more engaged in the conversation on her phone than with the man sitting next to her, her husband of 15 years. It wasn't the first text. It wasn't even the grin. It was the way she locked that phone like it held the deepest secret she couldn't risk me seeing. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. And it was only going to get worse from here. You know that feeling you get in the pit of your stomach, like something's rotting inside you? That was me for the next few days. I wasn't sleeping much, just laying there next to Karen, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. But every little thing she did from that night on felt like a punch in the gut. She had this habit of leaving her phone face up on the coffee table whenever we watched TV. Now it was always face down, or worse, clutched in her hand like it was some life support machine. She'd spend more time in the bathroom too, and not in the usual "I need a break from the kids" kind of way. I'd hear muffled voices from behind the door, the soft ping of notifications as soon as she got in there. So, I did what any desperate husband would do in my situation. I started snooping. It wasn't like I hadn't tried talking to her. I had. One night after dinner, I asked her outright if anything was wrong. Her answer? "I'm just tired, you know? Work's been stressful." Tired. That word stung in ways I can't even explain. I couldn't call her a liar outright, but I knew damn well it wasn't the truth. She wasn't tired, she was bored. Bored with me, with us, with the life we'd built. But I didn't have proof. Not yet. That all changed on a Tuesday night. Karen had left her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she took one of her long showers. It was a small, rare window of opportunity, and I wasn't about to waste it. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed it, unlocked it, thank God she hadn't thought to change the passcode, and scrolled straight to her messages. My hands were shaking. When I pulled up to the shop, it was just as I expected. A small, rundown place that barely looked like it stayed in business. I parked across the street and watched for a while, waiting for the right moment. After about an hour, I saw him. Josh. Strolling out of the front door like he didn't have a care in the world. He didn't see me, of course. Why would he? He thought he was safe. Thought he could sneak around with my wife and not face any consequences. I gave it a few minutes before I followed him. He headed down the block to a little diner, probably his regular lunch spot. I parked a few spots down and waited until he went inside before I got out of the car. I wasn't nervous, just angry. Angry at him, at Karen, at how stupid I'd been to trust her. But now I had control. And I was going to use it. I walked into the diner, the little bell on the door ringing as I stepped inside. Josh was sitting at a booth near the window, completely oblivious, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. I didn't bother with small talk. I went straight to his booth and stood there, waiting for him to look up. When he did, the color drained from his face. He recognized me instantly. Of course he did. We'd been at the same damn family events, BBQs, and parties for years. He knew exactly who I was. Mind if I sit? I asked, not really giving him a choice.
I slid into the booth across from him, watching as he scrambled to find his words.
Jake, hey, man, what's going on?
His voice was shaky, nervous.
He knew what was coming.
Cut the shit, Josh, I said, my voice low and steady.
You know exactly why I'm here.
He swallowed hard, glancing around the diner like he was looking for an escape route.
But there wasn't one. Not for him. Look, I can explain. Explain what?
I cut him off, leaning in closer.
Explain how you've been screwing my wife behind my back for months? Explain how you thought you could get away with it because I trusted both of you? He didn't have an answer.
Just sat there, his face pale, his hands shaking on the table. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Here's how this is going to work, I said, keeping my voice calm, even though I wanted to reach across the table and choke the life out of him.
You're going to walk away from her. Right now.
No texts, no calls, no more meetings.
You're done. Because if I see you anywhere near her again, you're going to wish you'd never been born. Understand?
Josh nodded quickly, his eyes wide with fear.
Yeah, man, I swear. It's over. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen? I laughed bitterly. You don't accidentally start fucking a married woman, Josh.
He winced at my words, like he couldn't handle the reality of what he'd done. I didn't know how serious things were between you two.
That was it. That was the last straw.
Before I even realized what I was doing, I slammed my fist down on the table, making his cup of coffee spill over.
You didn't know how serious things were? We've been married for 15 years, you piece of shit. How much more serious does it get?
The diner had gone quiet.
People were staring now, but I didn't care. Let them stare.
Josh was squirming in his seat, probably wondering how far I was going to take this.
Look, I know I fucked up, he said, his voice shaky. I'm sorry, okay? I'll leave her alone. I swear.
I stared at him for a long moment, trying to decide if he was worth more of my time. But the truth was, I already knew what I needed to do.
Threatening him wasn't enough.
He had to feel the consequences of screwing with me, with my life. I stood up, tossing a couple of bills on the table to cover his coffee.
Good. Because if you don't, I'm going to ruin you. And that's a promise. I walked out of the diner without looking back.
I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Josh might have been scared, but fear wasn't enough. I wanted him to suffer the way I was suffering.
I spent the next few days gathering everything I could on him.
His job, his personal life, his connections. Turns out, he wasn't exactly a saint outside of my marriage either. The guy had a reputation for dipping his toe in other people's relationships, wrecking things just for the thrill of it.
I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it sooner.
I compiled every bit of dirt I could find on him: old flings, debts he owed, shady business dealings. I even found out that he was on thin ice with his job, having already screwed up a few big projects. He wasn't as smart as he thought, leaving his life in such a mess that all it took was a little digging to find everything I needed.
Once I had everything, I made my move.
First, I sent an anonymous tip to his employer.
Nothing too dramatic, just enough to get them looking into his background. A couple of emails detailing his poor performance, along with some of the more unsavory personal details I'd uncovered.
The kind of stuff that could make a boss rethink who they had working for them. Next, I hit his social circles. I wasn't sure if his family knew about his little hobby of wrecking marriages, but I made sure they did. I sent messages to his siblings, his parents, even his old high school friends. I wasn't explicit, just dropped enough hints to let them know Josh had a habit of sticking his nose where it didn't belong. By the end of the week, his life was falling apart.
His boss put him on probation, his family wasn't speaking to him, and Karen? She'd already cut him off. I made sure of that. The best part? I didn't even have to get my hands dirty.
All it took was a little nudge in the right direction, and Josh's world crumbled around him.
But I wasn't finished yet.
The final blow came when I sent him a message and email from a burner account. Short, sweet, and to the point, next time, stay away from other men's wives.
I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. The damage was done.
Josh would never cross me again.
He wasn't just scared now, he was finished.
As I sat back, watching the fallout from a distance, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: satisfaction.
It wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming control.
Josh had taken something from me, something I couldn't get back. But I made sure he lost more. Next, it was time to deal with Karen. For good. Karen was a shell of herself by the time I walked back through the door that evening. The house felt different now, cold, distant, like the life we had built here had evaporated. I saw her sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a half-empty glass of wine, the same one she'd probably been nursing all day. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, but none of that moved me.
I'd run out of sympathy long ago.
"Jake," she whispered when she saw me, her voice hoarse from either the wine or the tears.
Probably both.
I didn't say anything, just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to spit out whatever she was about to say. We both knew this conversation was inevitable, and now that everything had come crashing down, there was nothing left for her to hide behind. "We need to talk," she said, wiping at her face.
"Please." "Talk?" I echoed, leaning against the wall. "You think talking is going to fix this?"
"No," she hesitated, probably searching for the right words to pull me back from the brink. But she had no idea how far gone I was.
I need you to understand. I never meant for it to get this far. I didn't want to hurt you."
"You keep saying that," I snapped, stepping forward.
"But you did hurt me. You hurt all of us. You think this is just about you and me? What about the kids, Karen? What about the life we built?"
She flinched like I'd slapped her, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to let her off the hook with her sad little sob story about how it wasn't supposed to happen. It had happened, and no amount of crying was going to change that. "I was lost," she said, her voice barely above a whisper.
"I don't know why I did it.
It was like I was trying to sabotage everything.
Like I didn't deserve to be happy. Don't give me that bullshit."
I cut her off before she could go any further with her excuses.
"You sabotaged everything because you were bored. Plain and simple.
You got bored with your life, with me, and instead of doing the right thing, you ran off to screw some other guy.
Just admit it."
She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped, dropping her head into her hands. "I don't know how to explain it, Jake," she whispered, her voice breaking.
"I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed you. But I didn't want it to end like this. I didn't want us to fall apart."
"It's already fallen apart," I said coldly. "And you're the one who smashed it to pieces." She sniffed, wiping at her nose, but I wasn't moved by her tears. I'd spent the last few weeks imagining this moment, playing it out in my head 1,000 different ways.
I thought I'd be angry. I thought I'd be screaming, yelling, breaking things. But the truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. I was done.
She must have sensed it, too, because when she looked back up at me, there was something different in her eyes.
Not defiance. Not guilt. Just acceptance.
"I'm sorry," she whispered.
"I'm so sorry." "Yeah, you are," I said, shaking my head. "But that doesn't change anything."
There was a long silence between us, the kind that said everything neither of us had the courage to put into words. This was the moment where we had to decide how this was going to end, whether we were going to keep fighting for something that was already dead, or whether we were going to finally admit defeat and walk away. "I've already talked to a lawyer," I said, breaking the silence.
"I'm filing for divorce. This is over." Karen didn't react right away.
She just sat there, staring at me like she hadn't really expected me to go through with it. Like she thought there was still a chance I'd forgive her, that we could somehow fix the broken pieces of our marriage. "Jake, please," she said after a moment, her voice trembling. "Please don't do this. I'll do anything. We can go to counseling. We can try again. I'll quit my job, I'll never talk to him again, whatever you want. Just, don't end us like this." Her desperation didn't move me. I'd heard enough of her empty promises. "You don't get it, do you? It's already over. The minute you decided to cheat, you ended us. I'm just making it official." "I'll change," she insisted, standing up and walking over to me. "I swear, Jake. I'll change. We can make this work." I stepped back, keeping my distance. "I don't want to make it work, Karen. I'm done." She stopped, frozen in place, and I could see the panic in her eyes. She wasn't ready for this. She hadn't expected me to actually walk away. "Jake, please. Please don't do this." Her begging might have worked on me weeks ago, back when I was still trying to figure out how to make sense of it all. But now? Now it was just pathetic. She was the one who had burned it all down, and now she wanted me to be the one to put out the fire. I wasn't interested in saving her anymore. "I'm filing for divorce," I repeated, my voice steady. "And I want full custody of the kids." Her eyes widened in shock. "You can't do that," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't just take them from me." "I'm not taking them from you," I said. "I'm protecting them from you. You're the one who broke this family. You're the one who brought another man into our lives. You think I'm going to let you keep pretending like you're some perfect mother after that?" "I am a good mother," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I love them, Jake. Don't do this. Don't take them from me." "You should have thought about that before you decided to blow up our family," I said coldly. "You don't get to play the victim now." She was shaking, sobbing, but I didn't care. I'd heard enough. The time for talking was over. "I'll have my lawyer contact you," I said, turning to leave. "We'll work out the details then." "Wait," she cried, grabbing my arm as I tried to walk away. "Please, Jake. Don't leave me. I'll do anything. We can fix this." I stopped, looking down at her hand on my arm. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered everything, every lie, every betrayal, every kiss she shared with him, and any sympathy I had evaporated. I pulled my arm away. "It's too late, Karen. We're done." She collapsed into the chair, sobbing uncontrollably as I walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, and out of her life for good. I stayed in a motel that night, not far from the house. It wasn't much, just a place to sleep, but it gave me the space I needed to breathe. I wasn't sure what the next steps would be. I hadn't figured out how to explain this to the kids, hadn't even really thought about what life would look like once the divorce was finalized. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going back. Not now, not ever. The next morning, I called my lawyer. We set up a meeting to finalize everything: the divorce papers, the custody arrangements, the division of assets. I was ready to close the chapter on this part of my life and move forward. I wasn't going to let Karen drag me back into the mess she'd created. Later that afternoon, Karen called me. I ignored it. I wasn't interested in hearing more of her excuses, more of her promises to change. She'd had her chance, and she'd thrown it away. I wasn't going to let her pull me back in just because she was scared of being alone. A few hours later, she texted me. It was long and rambling, full of apologies and explanations, but none of it mattered anymore. She was trying to justify what she'd done, trying to make me understand how she felt. But I didn't need to understand. I didn't want to. I deleted the message without even reading it all the way through. That night, as I lay in the motel bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The anger was still there, the hurt, the betrayal. But underneath it all, there was a sense of calm, like I'd finally taken back control of my life. Karen was no longer my problem. I didn't have to worry about what she was doing, who she was with, or what lies she was telling. It was over. Tomorrow, I'd meet with my lawyer. Tomorrow, we'd start the process of ending this nightmare. And tomorrow, I'd begin the process of figuring out what came next for me, for the kids, and for the life I was ready to rebuild without her. The morning I sat in my lawyer's office, signing the divorce papers, I expected to feel something more. Anger, sadness, even relief, but there was nothing. I was numb, detached, as if the person sitting there wasn't even me. Eric, my lawyer, went over everything again, but I wasn't really listening. I just nodded at the right moments and signed where I needed to. The whole process felt mechanical, like something I had to do, not something I wanted to do. Once we were done, he slid the papers into a folder and gave me a firm look. "This is a tough situation, Jake," he said, like he hadn't said the same thing a dozen times before. "But it's the right move. It's time to move on." I knew he was right. I knew that every time I saw Karen's face or heard her voice, it would bring back all the rage, all the betrayal. But knowing that didn't make it any easier. 15 years of marriage. Gone. Over because she couldn't keep herself satisfied. That kind of damage doesn't just disappear. But I had no other choice now. It was time to face reality. I left the office and drove around aimlessly for a while, not really wanting to go back to the motel yet. My mind was racing with everything that still needed to be done. I'd have to move out, figure out a place for me and the kids, set up visitation schedules, explain to my family and friends why Karen wouldn't be around anymore. I wasn't looking forward to telling the kids. I'd been putting it off, waiting until everything was official. It wasn't that they didn't know something was up, of course. They'd noticed the tension, the fights, the way Karen and I had barely spoken to each other over the past few weeks. But knowing something is wrong isn't the same as having it confirmed. After a couple of hours of driving around, I headed back to the motel. I sat on the bed, staring at the wall, trying to figure out how the hell to explain this to them. They were still so young. They wouldn't understand why things had fallen apart, why their mom and dad couldn't just work it out like they always had before. Eventually, I picked up the phone and called Karen. She picked up on the first ring. "Jake?" Her voice was soft, hesitant, like she was afraid to speak. "We need to talk about the kids," I said, skipping any pleasantries. I didn't want to hear any more apologies or promises. We were beyond that. She hesitated. "What are you going to tell them?" I sighed, rubbing my forehead. "The truth. That we're getting a divorce. That we're not going to be living together anymore." There was a pause on the other end. "Do we have to tell them yet? Can't we wait until things settle down a little more?" "No," I said firmly. "We've waited long enough. They deserve to know what's going on. We can't keep pretending everything's fine." Karen was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her trying to hold back tears. "I know. You're right. I don't want to hurt them." "Yeah, well, it's too late for that," I replied coldly. "We've already hurt them. Now it's about making sure they're not left in the dark anymore." "Okay," she whispered. "When do you want to do it?" "Tomorrow," I said. "I'll come by after school. We'll sit them down together and explain everything." "All right," she agreed. There was a long pause before she added, "Jake. I'm sorry. For everything." I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening on the phone. I didn't want to hear her apologies. Not now. Not ever. "We'll talk tomorrow," I said, then hung up without waiting for her response. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the moment I would have to sit my kids down and tell them that their family was falling apart. I knew it was going to break them, just like it had broken me. But there was no other way. This was our reality now, and no amount of avoiding it was going to change that. The next day, I drove to the house after work. I pulled up to the driveway, feeling that familiar pit in my stomach, the same one I'd been carrying around since this whole nightmare began. I hadn't been back to the house in days, and now that I was standing there, it didn't even feel like home anymore. It was just a building, just a reminder of everything I'd lost.
Karen was waiting inside, looking as fragile as I'd ever seen her.
Her eyes were red from crying, and she gave me a weak smile when I walked in, like she was trying to make things seem normal. But there was no normal anymore.
We were past that.
The kids were in the living room, watching TV, oblivious to the bombshell that was about to drop.
I stood there for a moment, watching them, feeling a lump rise in my throat. I'd always been their protector, the one who made sure everything was okay. But this time, I couldn't protect them. This time, I was the one delivering the blow. Karen walked over to the couch and turned off the TV.
"Kids," she said softly.
"Your dad and I need to talk to you."
They looked up at her, confused, but they turned their attention to me when I sat down in the chair across from them. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words, but nothing seemed right.
"How do you explain to your kids that everything they know is about to change?"
"Your mom and we've been having some problems," I began, my voice steady but strained.
"And we've decided that we can't be together anymore."
Their faces dropped. My daughter, who was only 10, looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It means we're getting a divorce," Karen said, sitting down next to her.
"Your dad is going to be living somewhere else."
"But why?" my son asked, his voice shaking. He was only 12, barely old enough to understand what divorce even meant. I exchanged a glance with Karen, who looked like she was about to fall apart, but I wasn't going to sugarcoat it.
"Because your mom and we can't make it work anymore. We tried, but sometimes, things just don't go the way we want them to." The silence that followed was unbearable.
My daughter burst into tears, and my son just stared at me like I'd betrayed him, like I was the one who had caused all of this.
"I don't want you to leave," my daughter sobbed, clinging to Karen.
I felt a lump rise in my throat.
"I'm not leaving you," I said gently. "I'll still see you all the time. We'll figure out a schedule so you can be with both of us."
"But why can't you stay here?" my son asked, his voice thick with emotion.
"Can't you and Mom just talk it out?"
"I wish we could," I said, trying to keep my voice steady.
"But sometimes, even when you love someone, you just can't stay together. It's not your fault, okay? None of this is your fault." He didn't respond.
He just looked down at the floor, biting his lip like he was trying not to cry. My heart broke all over again, but I knew there was nothing I could do to fix it.
Not anymore.
We sat with them for a long time, answering their questions, trying to reassure them that things would be okay, even though I wasn't sure of that myself. When they finally went upstairs to their rooms, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Karen and I sat in silence for a while after they left, both of us lost in our thoughts. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper.
"Do you think they'll be okay?"
I shrugged.
"I don't know. I hope so." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt them." "I know," I said, standing up. "But we did. And now we just have to make the best of it." I didn't stay much longer. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to do. I walked out of the house without looking back, knowing that my life would never be the same. The divorce was finalized a few months later. The process was grueling, but I was ready for it. I wanted it done, wanted to close that chapter of my life and start fresh. Karen and I agreed on shared custody, and I moved into a small house nearby so the kids could stay close. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than dragging things out. As for Karen, I don't know. We barely speak outside of arrangements for the kids. She's a stranger to me now, a reminder of a life that doesn't exist anymore. Sometimes I wonder if she regrets what she did, if she ever thinks about how different things could have been. But I don't ask. I don't care anymore. I'm moving on. Slowly, but I am. The kids are adjusting, too. They're resilient, stronger than I gave them credit for. We're building something new, the three of us, and maybe it's not perfect, but it's ours. Karen made her choices, and I made mine. Now, all I can do is keep moving forward.
There's no going back, no fixing what's been broken.
But there's life on the other side of this, and I'm ready to face it. Whatever comes next, I'm ready.